Okay. Hey, welcome, comrades. Okay, so this talk is a little bit dense and long, so stick with me. But this talk is about one of the most important questions facing anyone that wants to fight for liberation. How do we actually win? Again and again, there's been revolutions across the history of capitalism, across the world. We're still seeing uprisings, mass movements every day fighting the system, but many have been crushed from without or strangled from within. Being derailed by strategies that substituted leaders, armies, or nationalist elites for the self-activity of ordinary people. The core of the real Marxist tradition is the idea that liberation cannot be handed down from above. It has to be fought for and won by the working class itself. And that's what we are fighting for, socialism from below. This puts us sharply at odds with Stalinist and Maoist traditions that elevated the party or the state over class struggle. In practice, these models disregarded mass democracy for state power and built new capitalist ruling classes under a red banner. Marx said the emancipation of the working class must be the act of the working class itself. But Stalin, Mao, and countless nationalist leaders tore that principle apart, replacing it with top-down rule supposedly on behalf of the people. Since the 1930s, revolutionary socialists, starting with Trotsky, have argued that the USSR and China were not socialist. These revolutionaries stood for building socialism through mass struggle, and their arguments are more relevant today than ever, especially in our movements, Palestine solidarity, the uprisings that we can talk about in discussion, where the pool of nationalist politics and guerrilla heroism, a small elite fighting on behalf of the people, can obscure the central role of the working class. So in this talk, I'm going to be talking about the two different versions of socialism. Socialism from below and socialism from above. The socialism from above is the Stalin and the Maoism. And then I'm going to finish on Trotsky, his theories, and why they're still relevant today for us organizing and fighting. So what do we mean by socialism from below? At the heart of it, Marxism is a theory of working class revolution. It looks to the working class, to us, to lead the transformation of society and build a classless world. Marx said that the working class is the first class in history that can abolish class itself, not because we're morally superior, but because of how the working class is organized under capitalism. Under feudalism, you had, individual peasants with individual plots of land. A peasant family would, work on the land, create grain to feed itself and to give the Lord, but it wasn't working in collaboration with the peasant family down the road, let alone the peasant family on the other side of the world. But capitalism is very, very different. We now have an internationalized production, socialized production. So just as an example to spell that out, take the vaccine, any vaccine. You have scientists across the world working on doing the research. You have workers making chemicals in India or Germany. You have engineers building the syringes and all the, bits and bobs. You have truck drivers delivering them. You have admins and IT workers doing the scheduling systems, and nurses, cleaners, social workers running the clinics and hospitals, miners digging up the materials, textile workers making the PPE, so on, so on, so on. So there's this, international production line. This is what we call socialized production, with millions of workers contributing to make one product. So workers already run society collectively, cooperatively, with no single worker being able to lay claim to a particular part of the system. We just don't have democratic control or input into how society is run. And that's why Marx said that the working class can abolish class, because we already run the system, we already have everything we need to do that, the technology, the logistics, the expertise, and the coordination. If we organize, act collectively, we have the power to reorganize the world bottom up, to run on the basis of human need, not for profit. So we can abolish, there's enough wealth for us to abolish poverty. We can, restructure the world to rip out get rid of the fossil fuels, have production that's not destroying the environment. We could rebuild schools, hospitals, as I said, fix the climate crisis. We can tear down the borders, the prisons, this disgusting statistic in Australia that it costs like $1 million to cage a child. We could use that money to actually put into all the services families and children and people need to thrive. But to do that, we need to get rid of capitalism. We need to get rid of the arms dealers, the fossil fuel bosses that are destroying the planet, all the bosses that exploit us and use the surplus to wage war on each other. And we can do this, as I said, by building real workers' democracy from below that runs the system rationally and humanely, that puts human need before profit. So what does this actually look like? And the most vivid example, though short-lived, was in Russia in 1917. For a brief period, workers and peasants and soldiers, they rose up and got rid of the king that had ruled. There was a monarchy, a Tsarist absolute monarchy in Russia for hundreds of years. Through mass councils called Soviets, ordinary people began the process of building socialism. So, as I said, they kicked out the king and they set up these very democratic councils called Soviets, each 1,000 workers and each, having elected, every 1,000 people electing a delegate to represent them. Workers first formed these Soviets out of the mass strikes that were thrown up in the 1905 revolution, and they re-emerged again in February in 1917 as a way to organize and coordinate the strike movement against World War I, against the food shortages and working conditions. But in the process of this activity, the Soviets began to control production in the factories. The King of Russia fled. The ruling class was like, you need to leave or they're going to overthrow us. So he ran away. And at this point, workers are starting to control society through these Soviets. One moderate politician wrote, the Soviets seized all the post and telegraph bureaus, the wireless, all the Petrograd railway stations, all the printing established, so that without its permission, it was impossible to send a telegram to leave Petrograd or to read the print and appeal. In the space of a few days, there was no town in Russia that did not have a Soviet. So the Russian class overthrew the Tsar, and then came in liberal democracy. But liberal democracy didn't end the war, and it didn't solve the food shortage crisis or the economic crisis. And so the workers overthrew that a few months later. And then you have, a workers' state where workers are actually running Russia. And at the center of this revolution, they're also, not just redistributing wealth, not just running the trains and the food distribution and all the rest of it themselves, but they're also fighting oppression. So the Bolsheviks set up the Zenit, which, set up communal kitchens, childcares, cleaning facilities, so that, as one of the Bolshevik women, Kolontai, said, the tyranny of the family, the domestic labor wasn't just on individual women, but was actually socialized, for everyone in society to deal with. The Bolsheviks also reversed the national oppression of minorities. Abortion was legalized, homosexuality was legalized, divorce was legalized. They outlawed anti-Semitism, and they formed Red Army Guards to actually protect Jewish people against pogroms. So this was socialism in motion, the democratic, participatory, and rooted in the working class. But there was huge limits to the revolution because Russia was a very, very poor, mostly peasant country. Okay, so it was out of these, material restraints on the actual revolution and eventually the defeat of the revolution that we get the rise of Stalinism. So in this section, I'm going to talk about Stalinism, and then I'm going to go on to talk about Maoism as well. So the Bolsheviks were very, very clear that the revolution had to spread from Russia to more advanced countries with more advanced industry like Germany, to be able to actually share, the technology and the advanced industry to kind of save Russia from this economic situation that they were in. But unfortunately, there were massive uprisings in Germany and Italy. Actually, all of Europe was in revolt, inspired by the Russian Revolution, ending World War I and saying, our rulers sent us to slaughter each other, and actually, what was it for? we want to, reclaim the wealth that we're creating, and we want a different society. But unfortunately, there wasn't Bolshevik-type parties, like there wasn't Russia to actually lead those revolutions to success. So unfortunately, they failed, and Russia was left, the Russian Revolution was left isolated to fight on its own. And actually, also what happened was that 14 foreign armies, ones that were just fighting each other in World War I, then came together, united to say, actually, we need to crush this revolution. Let's put aside our differences, fighting to carve up the world, fighting to colonize the world. Let's put that aside and actually unite to crush this, because we don't want our own working classes to get any ideas, inspired by Russia. So after the Civil War that went on for years, like the Red Army, which was the working class army that was trying to defend the revolution, it actually it beat what they called the White Armies, which was those 14 armies, imperialist armies invading to crush the revolution, but at a massive, massive, massive cost to the revolution, because out of the 3 million workers that took control in 1917, only 1 million people, so a third, were left over. And the people that led the Russian Revolution, the most militant workers, they were kind of on the front line trying to defend it, wiped out. The economy had been even more devastated. And so it was out of this defeat that a vacuum was left. And it was in this vacuum that a new bureaucratic ruling class emerged, 5 times larger than the remaining industrial workforce. So for every worker, at the end of the Civil War, for every worker you have 5 more bureaucrats who are like ex-Tsarist officials, ex-Tsarist bureaucrats, who are still kind of running the state machine, not coming back to power in the absence of the working class who'd been hollowed out during the Civil War. Okay, so I want to move on now to talk more about the rise of Stalinism. He rose as a figurehead of this new bureaucratic layer. Stalin went to war on the Bolsheviks, the original Bolsheviks who led that revolution by 1935, only 1.3 of the original Bolsheviks who had led that revolution in 1917 remained. So it's a completely different party. The rest of them had been murdered or fled or been exiled by Stalin. And a key theory that Stalin introduced to justify his regime was the theory of socialism in one country. And this was a real massive retreat from the real Marxist tradition of international revolution. And he argued that Russia could industrialize on its own. And he was saying we need to catch up with the West. We need to make up 100 years in 50 or even 10. And so he rolled out all these different economic schemes to try and catch up. And like the 5-year plan aimed to industrialize Russia at like breakneck speed. But millions of this industrialization relied on trying to squeeze, the workforce, and millions of people died, during this sped up industrialization, including 30,000 people just building one canal. And also as a part of this rapid industrialization, trying to catch up with the West, trying to actually compete with Western capitalism, a lot of the gains that the revolution won were rolled back. So all the things that I talked about in terms of, women's rights, queer rights, ethnic minority rights, a lot of that was all reeled back. Strikes were banned. Any opposition within the party, with outside the party, were outlawed. Stalin declared the women's question solved, and women were pushed back into traditional roles to serve the needs of the new bureaucracy, a state that needed bodies to fuel its factories and so on. So this wasn't socialism. It was state capitalism, a system where the state, not private capitalists, but the state owned the means of production, still accumulated capital off the back of exploiting workers and still competing internationally, but it was a state bureaucracy instead of, capitalists competing. And the USSR's foreign policy, as well as its internal policy, reflected this new ruling class, this new state capitalist class's interest. So it wanted stable alliances with other regimes instead of spreading international revolution. So, unlike the Bolsheviks set up an international organization called the Communist International in 1919 to try and spread the lessons of the Russian Revolution, and Trotsky played a leading role in this until he was isolated, purged from the party. So then Stalin used this Communist International not to spread the lessons of the Russian Revolution, but to actually use it as a way to enforce foreign policy that he needed to get those stable alliances to create a power bloc that could compete against the US. So this means, as I said, not spreading revolution, but actually betraying revolution through the different communist parties that were set up. So in Spain, there was a civil war against fascism, and the communist parties joined coalition governments to actually contain workers. The same happened in France, and in the Soviet satellite states that were set up, not through revolutions, but actually through Soviet tanks. And sometimes people say the USSR was anti-imperialist, but it only clashed with the US when it actually, or it only clashed with, it only seemed like it was anti-imperialist when it was clashing with the US. But when it came to its own, as I say, building that power bloc, it was completely fine to support the establishment of Israel through the Nakba, and it used its Czechoslovakia puppet state to actually train Zionist militias. It also, through the French Communist Party, backed the colonial repression in Algeria by the French. So when people say the Russian Revolution led to Stalin, we have to say no, that was state capitalism. Out of the defeat of workers' power rose Stalin. It was not a continuation of the Bolshevik Party, of the workers' democracy that we saw built in 1917. And so now I'm running out of time, but talk about Mao. Because, as I was saying, Stalin's policy of socialism in one country had implications internationally as well, and disastrously in China. So just to really quickly give context, in the 1920s, in China had been dominated by Japanese imperialism, Western imperialism. Workers and peasants were brutally repressed and exploited, super exploited. Don't have time to go into the whole kind of picture, but basically people were rising up. They were sick of the oppression and exploitation that they had been subject to by Japanese imperialism. So people were rising up, and there were two different parties that were kind of leading these uprisings against imperialism, which was the Kuomintang, the KMT, and then also the Communist Party that was set up by the Bolsheviks in that international communist network thing that I was talking about. So Trotsky argued, this is a revolutionary moment. Workers are seizing factories. We're starting to see those workers' councils again that we saw in Russia. And Trotsky says that the Communist Party, they had to remain an independent working class party. It could not, ally with the Kuomintang, the KMT, who represented more a Chinese, a Chinese ruling class that was ambitious to create Chinese capitalism. It wanted to kick out the Japanese just like Chinese peasants and workers, but not to create equality and a classless society, but to create Chinese capitalism. So Trotsky's saying, do not ally with the KMT. They will betray you. Once you kick out the imperialists, they will betray you. By contrast, Stalin is saying, no, the CCP, the Communist Party, this new party, a lot of these young militants actually leading the strikes, leading the uprisings. Stalin is saying, no, you have to contain that. You need to ally with the KMT. You don't raise class slogans. Just fight the Japanese bosses. When it comes to the Chinese bosses, leave it alone. Just calm down and ally with the KMT. It needs to be, Chinese classes all coming together to fight, imperialism. I'll just fast forward. Basically, the CCP followed Stalin's advice, and it was catastrophic. So in 1927, in Shanghai, there was a workers' strike that had held the city for 12 days. The KMT enters the city, and on Stalin's orders, the CCP, all the working class militants, they lay down their arms, they welcome, their allies, and, as soon as the KMT establishes power in the city, they slaughter 50,000 workers, Communist Party members, the leaders of, this uprising, they're gone, slaughtered, and it's, an incredibly tragic lesson actually about needing working class independence, not relying on nationalist leaders that are going to be with you against the imperialists, but will turn the guns on you the moment the imperialists are kicked out. And so the CCP is reduced to ashes, and out of those ashes, in the same way that Stalin rises to power off the defeat of the Russian working class, Mao rises to power off the defeat of the Chinese working class. So there's only a few thousand people left, they retreat to the mountains, and Mao was one of them, and he transforms the Communist Party into a peasant army that is based not on the working class, but on military conquest, on military battle against the imperialists and the KMT. So fast forward to 1949, you have, the Communist Party takes Beijing. They've, fought all these different battles with this peasant army, and they've won. You get, you get China as we kind of beginnings of China as we know it today. But the working class is not involved at all. There's no strikes, there's no Soviets, no workers' councils. The working class are kind of cheering from the sidelines. Anyway, I have to fast forward massively because I'm running out of time. Maybe if I can, no, I need more time than that, sorry. I'm so sorry.
Okay,
how long has that been?
It's been about 20
minutes. Okay, we're gonna have to fast forward massively. Okay, so in the same way, China is not, in the same way, Mao builds a state capitalist regime modeled off Russia. It's about trying to catch up with the West, trying to build a strong nationalist Chinese economy that can compete on the global stage. And, the Great Leap Forward, you have millions of people dying from famine. Mao is trying to squeeze the population to catch up, and it doesn't work. Millions of people die. And it's not until, in the 80s, they open up the country to foreign investment that we, get the powerhouse of China that we know today, rivaling the US. So it was never socialism, it was state capitalism, not built by workers, but imposed on them. So Trotsky, which is, the kind of the revolutionary who we base a lot of our kind of politics on, stood in sharp contrast to the Stalinist and Maoist regimes. They built these authoritarian states, crushed workers' democracy, but Trotsky fought for a different vision, a revolutionary strategy based on working class self-emancipation. And for that, he was slandered, exiled, and he was ultimately assassinated by Stalin, on Stalin's orders in 1940. So as I said, at the core of Trotsky's politics is that real Marxist tradition about the self-emancipation of the working class. One of his most important theoretical contributions was permanent revolution, which he developed in 1905 in that first Russian Revolution. Basically, at the time, a lot of the Marxists were saying every country has to follow the same development as England. So you need to go through feudalism, and then you need like 100 years of capitalism, and then only when you've developed that, strong capitalist economy can socialism be on the agenda. And Trotsky said, no, that's wrong. Like, we live in, now capitalism is international. There's all these different versions of capitalist development. So, and he was looking at Russia. He was saying, okay, we've got this massively agricultural society. There's still heaps of peasants working the land, but we have also imported some really advanced technology from Europe, and we have these massive factories that actually look like the massive factories in England, with these massive, strong workforces, which actually led the Russian Revolution. So you don't need to go through this whole stage of development before socialism is put on the agenda. And I'm not really going to do it a lot of justice explaining this, but basically he was saying, you don't need like a capitalism to look exactly like England. You can, there's these pockets of really strong industrial working classes that can lead revolutions, and bypass the stage of needing, liberal capitalism for a really long time. Actually, you can smash authoritarian regimes, win liberal democracy, and actually keep going beyond the bounds of liberal democracy, keep going towards real democracy, workers' democracy, like I was talking about with those workers' councils, with, from below actually restructuring production in the needs of peoples instead of profit. And so the revolution has to keep going beyond those liberal democratic reforms, but it also has to go beyond borders as well, because like in Russia, we see this with other countries today that are on the periphery, that have been purposefully underdeveloped by capitalism. So like take Egypt, for example, still large swathes of, really deep rural poverty, but also these massive factories like the Mahala textile factories that have, really strong working classes that actually led the Egyptian revolution in 2011. But those revolutions can't survive unless they spread internationally to other more advanced capitalist powers that can share the technology, that can share the resources, because alone they will get crushed by, the equivalent of the 14 foreign armies that crushed the Russian Revolution. So, yeah, I'll wrap up now. To conclude, just to go back over that core principle of socialism from below, you can't get transformation in society from politicians, from the leaders of guerrilla armies, from anarchists or not anarchists, people in black bloc, like doing things on behalf of the people. It actually needs to be mass organization of the working class, and I think this matters today for Palestine, for example. It's a very, very sharp example of why, we need to fuse the struggle for national liberation with the struggle of the working class against capitalism as a whole. Because Israel isn't just this like rogue actor, it's actually backed by the US imperialism, and it's kept in place as well by all of the ruling classes throughout the Middle East. And, these ruling classes are not allies. Like the axis of resistance we've seen cannot free Palestine. They have no interest. It's actually the populations that the axis of resistance represses, that where the freedom for Palestine lies. But, a lot of Palestinian organizations, and I think if people want to go to the strategies for liberation, this will be discussed a lot more, like the PLO, the PFLP, even Hamas today, whilst the membership of these organizations, incredibly heroic, incredibly brave, have been fighting against all odds, against, the biggest superpower in the world backing Israel, actually a lot of the strategy of these groups are rooted in military struggle of a minority on behalf of the mass of Palestinians, the mass of the working class across the region. And these have often led to betrayal, essentially. So the first Intifada, you see mass strikes, you see popular resistance committees rising up, and the PLO, who's been exiled, are very, they're concerned to contain this power that's been unleashed in the first Intifada. They're, almost as scared as the Israelis and the US imperialists about the power that the first Intifada is unleashing, about the inspiration that could spread across the region, that we've seen time and time again spread across the region, like in the Arab Spring. And so they sign the Oslo Accords, they contain that power, they institutionalize the subordination of, Palestine, they give back the power to the occupation. So, as I mentioned earlier, Trotsky, said that revolutions need to spread, they need to fuse, and they need with the working class and be led by independently by a working class leadership. And I think Palestine is such an example of that. It needs to, the struggle for Palestine needs to be tied to regional revolt, especially the Arab working class. Okay, I'll finish. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll leave it on that, because I think, the kind of arguments about leadership and direction of all of these different struggles crop up time and time again, and I think we're probably more used to the kind of ultra-leftist or the electoralism. So like, okay, we're going to do direct action, we're going to have a small group of people lock on or block or barricade or occupy on behalf of the movement. Like we need people to hurry up and catch up with us, and they haven't, so let's just do do it with the 5 people in this room today. Or, you know, we need to elect, you know, we've given up on the protest, nothing's happened, we haven't toppled Israel yet, so we just need to elect politicians who are going to, you know, make change on behalf of us. And I think in contrast to that, even though it's a bit different from Maoism and Stalinism, but I think we still need to take the heart of the real Marxist tradition today, of Trotskyism today, and say, actually, we need to do whatever we can to fan the flames of self-organization of the working class. So we're always about trying to build up broader layers, you know, in our universities, the BDS movements. We're always trying to work in our unions. We're always pointing, even if the working class in Australia isn't on, you know, these mass strikes now, look at Bangladesh, look at Serbia, look at Turkey, look at Greece. Like, you know, Bangladesh, there was 1 million people on the streets fighting for Palestine. So I think, yeah, the internationalism is also a very important aspect of the real Marxist tradition. Like, we're an international working class, and yeah, the fight for Palestine, the fight against exploitation across the world, it has to come from below, and that's the real Marxist tradition. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.